Hello and welcome to today's Truth Proof stream. Now today it's not a live stream, as you probably can guess, but nonetheless we've got some great accounts from Paul tonight, and I think we're going to kick off with a story that he has covered before. It's called the Wharncliffe Woods account, and recently he's got some information from a witness, and Paul will go on to tonight to describe what he's got. So first of all, welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Les, and good to be chatting to you again. And I'm glad that you've explained why we can't do a live stream this week. And you know, obviously we will get round to doing some in the future. We're not writing them off, but we're just sort of busy. There's quite a lot of irons in fire, and time's just not allowing. So we'll get this out to you today and a few bits of information, and I hope it entertains you. The story I'm going to talk about, and I shouldn't even say story, it's more than a story, it's somebody's terrifying experience today. I have covered before, I've written about it in Truth Proof 3, but last week the main witness allowed me to record his story for something that me and Les of Digital Creations will be doing probably next year, and I just wanted to get just gathering little bits of information. Opportunity arose, and I thought we'd get it in. So what I've called it is the Wharncliffe Woods Monster. So make no mistake about it, if this guy's telling the truth, and I believe he is, what he saw with his three friends that night back in September 1984 was nothing short of a monster. So we're going back, Les, 36 years, and it's an account that he'd not told anyone until, well, I think at least 2 years ago. The only person he'd told was his wife, and I think he were looking at some stuff on YouTube, and I think how the story went, it overrun, and another episode of something came on, and it was something to do with werewolf type, Bigfoot type entities, and it brought it all back to him. He'd not forgotten, he'd just not bothered talking about it because it's just that incredible, and he didn't mention it because people, you know, the ridicule factor. So let's jump to it. He entered Wharncliffe Wood with three of his friends in September 1984. They planned on going into the woods just for a night of camping, and they wanted to get in there early. That didn't work. The age range for the guys was between 18, which is what Ian was. We've changed his name, by the way, but he'll remain as Ian now throughout this story, and the eldest one was 30. One of the guys' mums drove them to the edge of Wharncliffe Woods, dropped them off, and it was getting dark as they entered the woods. So you know yourself, Les, when you enter heavily wooded area or forest, if it's getting dark outside, as soon as you get in it, it's dark. He said they walked for about a kilometre. And during that time, this is his first venture into the woods, his first venture, I suppose, into adulthood, really. He's with a group of guys who are a little bit older than him. He said, and they could hear water running. He asked what it was. He said, there's a waterfall. So anybody who's familiar with the area, that waterfall will still be there. He says, I didn't see the waterfall. He says, but I could hear it. He said, we walked about 200 yards away from it, so the sound died.
Yeah.
And he said it was just thick, sort of semi-mature trees, mature trees, and bracken and gorse. He said, and we came to what we considered a little bit of a clearing in the trees, but it was still a lot of bracken and fern and gorse. He said, and we cleared it. 4 to 6 foot circle. I'm not going to say 6 foot because I don't know. 4 to 6 foot circle. He says, and we've got this wall then, all the way around us, of this bracken. We can all picture it. We've all been in woodland. He says, and that's where we settled. He says, I sat with my back to the tree, or to a tree. I stopped him midpoint because I wanted to get an outline of the positions. And one of his friends, he said, was a 15 to 16 stone bodybuilder, did a lot of weight training. He said, and I'm sat with my back to the tree at the 6 o'clock position, and this guy is sat at the 12 o'clock. Approximately, we'll say 4 to 6 feet away from him. He said, there's another one sat at 3 o'clock and there's another one sat at 9 o'clock. He's the only one with his back to a tree. The guy at 12 o'clock had a tarpaulin type cover with him, which he put on the ground and then ran it up the back of the bracken, and so I don't know, tied it or whatever he did to a tree. It went up about 4 foot. He said it was almost like an Indian summer, Les. You know, there was no wind or anything, but that's what he did. He said it was a lovely night, even though it was September, and it's very dark. They lit a small fire, and everything's going nice. No alcohol, Les. You know, I'm keen to ask them this. Were any alcohol involved? And there wasn't. And
well, yeah, I mean that's a good question, obviously, because guys of that age, you know, they do go into the woods and they have a little bit of a shindig, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, and yes, I mean that's a strong possibility that they could have had some alcohol, but you're saying they didn't.
They didn't have any alcohol, no. And he said, I don't know. He said it had gone past midnight. He said, and we're sort of. We'd all been chatting. I don't mean they're chatting about spooky things. They're just chatting life in general. Girls, I don't know, you know, they're just chatting. And 3 of them started to get sleepy. Now, Ian said he is a very light sleeper, and he said, I'll watch the fire. If you guys want to sort of get your head down and go to sleep, you'll do that. So remember, we've got the 12 o'clock guy, 3 o'clock and the 9 o'clock positions. He said, I'm sort of sat there. I'm, you know, half an hour past, running into the hour perhaps. I'm not entirely sure. 36 years have passed, guys, so none of us will know for certain. He said, and I started to nod off myself. He said, but then I heard a twig snap. He said, and I sort of immediately awake. And as I looked over, he said it had just got hold of him. And this is where the story sort of gets frightening for these guys anyway. He said, and it had reached over the tarpaulin. All he saw was the bicep and the forearm of something huge, and picked his friend up, the bodybuilder who weighs 15 to 16 stones, 6 foot, over 6 foot tall, by, I thought it was just one, I thought he'd picked him up by his ankle when I initially interviewed him. It wasn't. Its hand circumference got both his calves and picked him up.
What?
Outright, straight out, and it held him. Now, he'd only got a visual on this for 3 to 5 seconds tops. In the glowing light of the fire, he saw no head, he saw nothing else. I asked him how high above the floor this guy's head was, and he said 2.5 to 3 feet. Now, let's stay with this image of 3 feet now, and a 6 foot man, and we've got him bit calves so we can knock a foot off. This thing's holding him outstretched 8 foot at the shoulder, you know, to where his calves would be. Now, Ian said when his eyes met with this sight, he said because it was just in one smooth movement, it just leant in, picked him up. He said the tarp, which was going up the back, was about 4 foot tall. It was so big it didn't have to make a depression in the tarpaulin. He just reached over and grabbed him. He screamed and swore, and this thing dropped his friend immediately, just dropped him. Now, he said, I shouted, did you see it? By this time, it's almost like hysteria. Everybody's woken up. I mean, the 6 foot guy who was just being picked up, he's just gone from, I won't say a deep sleep, but he's just gone from sleeping to being suspended in the air. I mean, that must have been some kind of terrifying experience, but he didn't know what had done it. The others didn't. He told them what he'd seen. He said this arm, he said it's forearm, and I mean, I don't know how thick his thighs are now, but he said its forearm was as thick as my upper thigh, my thigh now, as it is today. So I went, what, about 25 inches? He goes, no, it'll be thicker than that. Now that is incredible. We're talking something potentially with a 25 to 30 inch forearm. I'm not going to give away where this guy lives, but he said where they live there is a zoo and there's gorillas in the zoo. He said, because I immediately said, well, like a gorilla or a bear? Obviously it wouldn't have been a bear because this thing had the I forgot, what is it, the opposal thumb. Like a bear couldn't have picked him up.
Yeah.
And there'd be no bear.
I mean, that's your first thought, isn't it? I mean, you know, big big arm come out as big as what you was described to you, and you're thinking, well, gorilla? It's got to be a gorilla, hasn't it? But where this wood is, it's situated by all, you know, these three peaks. I think it's three, isn't there? 3 peaks there, and there's quite a lot of moorland, and it's quite desolate. So, you know, where the wood is, there's lots of desolate area around that place.
Yeah.
What leads into the woods, so it's not impossible to think that something could exist along these lines. And for what you're saying, to your account that you've had, it something definitely exists with these guys.
Well, as you know, Les, we'll get to the story in a moment again, but last week we spoke, or the other week we spoke to Deborah Hartswell. Now, I'd spoken to Deborah about this Wharncliffe sighting or Wharncliffe account in the past, and she's got reports from Wharncliffe and the surrounding area of similar things. So once again, location is proving to be key. Me personally, I do not believe something so large, because I want to jump back to size, otherwise I'll lose thread of that in a minute, could be living and breathing and sustaining itself, even in that remote area of woodland. I just don't see it. I believe it's something other, some paranormal type interaction. There's something happening on another level here, in my opinion. I don't mean I'm right. Now, but just jumping back to it, it told me about the size of its forearm, this huge forearm, which incidentally he said was covered in fur, not hair. He said, and I said, what, like matted type, horrible fur? He said, no, it would look to be in really good, silky, black fur, good condition. But when I mentioned the potential of a gorilla doing something like that, and bearing in mind they're not that tall anyway, this guy's suspended 8 foot off the ground at the shoulder, so we've got to understand that whatever we're holding him had a neck and a head above that, so we're talking at least 9.5 foot, I would think, which is quite incredible. But he said, we've got gorillas, or there's gorillas in a zoo close to where I live. He said they would have looked like children at the side of this. I'd never seen anything like it in his life. Now, he also saw its hand, be it just the back of its hand, and he says, I could see its knuckles, and the skin was black.
Yeah,
you know, the skin was black. He said, but the hand itself, he says, was at least 9 inch across the back of the hand.
Yeah,
and Les, I find that incredible. When you go on.
Yeah, you said there was the glowing embers of the fire. How much of this fire was still, you know, was it a big fire? It had bent itself down. How much of this hand could he actually see? You know, you've got to take the account of the ambient light, what's left from the fire.
Well, that's all he'd got. He'd only got the light of the fire. He'd been keeping it going, but it weren't a roaring, glowing fire. It was sort of dying down.
Right.
And he was the only one that saw it. He's not claiming to have seen some glowing eyes and gnashing teeth, huge shoulders. He's seen an arm and a bicep at most, and he's seen the back of the arm as it's picked him up. He said left arm. Another arm. I'm glad you said that, Les. It was the left arm he saw. So the left arm thrust out, and he saw the back of the hand.
Yeah.
As I say, this guy has allowed us to record him, and I'm sure at some point you will get to hear a little bit from the actual witness. Not tonight, guys, because you know it still needs picking out the sort of prime bits, and we're going to keep this guy's identity out of it at all times, and we've agreed that, and that's what we will do.
Yeah.
So
I know you've sent that file to me today, and I haven't heard it yet, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting when I do.
Yeah. So he screamed, he swore, it dropped him, and now after that the camp went into sort of hysterics. One of the guys wanted to go charging off into the woodland.
Yeah.
And we had to stop him. I mean, it's a similar story. We've heard this before, not from this one, but on a similar theme. He said so. But he said, but what happened after? He says this thing left in the 12 o'clock position. He said it was like a tank going through the woodland. He says you could hear trees smashing and crashing. He said, and then all of a sudden there was a large sound like a tree splitting in half, and everything stopped.
Yeah.
Nothing. What happened then, Les? He said, obviously they're gathering, and he's telling them what he's seen, and they can't leave.
Yeah.
You know, they've walked at least 30 minutes to an hour into this. They've got a weak torch, glowing light of a fire. They can't leave. They stoke the fire up a bit more. He says about 30 minutes passed. He said, and then there was another splitting sound, crack, and they were there again. He said, but there was one behind him. There was another one behind him. There was two of them. He said, because I could hear crashing and bashing behind me, and there's sound in front of us. He said, and they were running around us. They were moving around us, smashing things up. He said it was like they were creating fear. He says we were terrified, and then all of a sudden it stopped. Nothing else. He said, and then 30 minutes to an hour would pass.
Yeah.
Bang, it started again. There's one behind him, and they're terrified, and this went on throughout the night. These guys were trapped for at least 4 to 6 hours in the wood, while these things were playing with them, as in fear, literally. Yeah. Because I've described the size of this thing, Les, so it must be clear to anybody listening, if these, whatever they were, wanted to have hurt these four young men, they could have done it at any time. There was nothing that they could have done to defend themselves. Anything with the strength to hold its arm outright and suspend 15 to 16 stone is be like, without sounding too terrible, it'd be like picking a baby up.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to interject here and ask you this question. And what you said earlier was, when the thing left, was it? Did you say in a northerly direction?
Yeah, it just went up from Ian's 12 o'clock. Ian was sat at 6 o'clock position. It picked his mate up, leaned over in the 12 o'clock, and it left straight in the 12 o'clock. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, but then they heard all this crashing and all this wood breaking and. Did they go afterwards and investigate the aftermath of all this crashing and breaking of wood?
I asked that. Good question, Les. I asked that myself. They wouldn't dare go back in because I mean, it sounds like somebody had ran a little JCB through woods. You know, literally whatever it was. He says you could hear trees just smashing. It was just running through everything, smashing them. But I found what I found equally interesting was the large or the perceived sound of a tree splitting in half and then silence.
Yeah.
And then it began again with this sound of this huge crack, and then the chaos sort of ensued again for another, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes, and then it stopped again, and that continued throughout the night. They weren't making a sound, whatever these things were. They weren't whooping and wailing. They weren't.
They're not communicating. Yeah, not communicating with each other.
The only sound is their physical presence, their immense size, smashing everything to bits around these four young men.
Yeah. So that leads me then to the next question, following from that, Paul, is that they never saw any destruction aftermath because they was too frightened to go and investigate, as you say. What about you yourself? Now, I've been in the woods with you. I have not seen any evidence of anything similar where you could say, well, a tree, the wind didn't blow that down. The wind, you know, it looks as if the wind did blow it down, probably. And so, have you seen any evidence yourself of any suspicious destruction in the wood?
I've seen some sort of debatable tree structures or stick structures. Sorry, I couldn't even get my words out there, guys. But around Danes Dyke and around various places. But you can never say with any certainty that you know, children haven't done this. You know, scouts or anything. So
especially when you're looking at the lighter pieces of wood. Because I've seen these constructions with yourself in Danes Dyke, and it's pieces of wood that really a child could pick up and position, but the anomalous bit about that, and I always remember this, is that they're placed at odd angles and odd heights in the tree across the boughs the bough of the tree where it meets the trunk.
That's correct. Yeah, there's that to take into consideration. I mean, I've just retold a story now that from 30 odd years ago that must sound incredible to some people, but I will always jump to the fact that we've got independent witnesses of all ages, of all faiths, of all beliefs, because you've got some who are ardent believers in this stuff, and you've got other people who the farthest thing in the world that they would want to believe in is something like what this guy's described, but once they've seen it, you can't unsee it. So they're either all lying or there's some truth attached to it. And I think there's truth attached to it. And now, jumping back to those tree structures and things, Les, we, as in me and you, spent some time in a forest a few months ago with a very knowledgeable man who showed us spruce and pine trees that were crossed. Mm. And his own views, and I would take this guy's word over my own because of his experience in the forests and woodlands, which are pretty extensive.
Yeah.
Is that if it was wind, why are they crossed like that? And he showed us lots of examples and told us about examples of these very large, mature spruce and pine that were in unusual positions, things he couldn't understand, actually bent.
Yeah, well, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because I think when a tree, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody can correct me and argue with this point, but when you get a sapling, then they grow towards the light.
Yeah.
Maybe these trees have grown to where the available light was, when it comes to the rest of the forest. So they've grown at an angle at odds to each other because that's where they've seen a predominant light. Does that make any sense?
Well, there's a possibility. I mean, but the forests that we've been entering recently, Les, most of them trees look like as straight as arrows. They're all sort of straight.
Yeah, they do.
But once again, and you make a good point, Les, because not everything that we're looking into is going to have an unexplained phenomena ending. There's going to be answers of a earthly explanation to much of what we're looking into. It just so happens that we've dropped on something quite recently, jumping away from Wharncliffe Woods, and we're not going to go into too much of great detail, but we've dropped on something quite recently that's coming from independent witnesses and similar locations that's going to be really special. And that's as much as I want to say about that bit at the moment, Les. But I just thought we'd cover Wharncliffe sighting and Ian's account, because he'd added a few more elements, the width of the hand, which I'd not got before. Oh, one more thing as well. When they actually got out of the wood when we got daylight, he says, because everything's, as soon as it started to lift and daylight arrived, everything, he says, the mood, the atmosphere, everything changed. And that's not me trying to make it sound like there's some kind of weird paranormal atmosphere. As the daylight lifts our spirits and puts us in a different frame of mind, we lose our fears. So they got out of the woods. When they actually got out of the woods and they inspected his friend's calves, they were absolutely black and blue with the sort of pressure that this thing had sort of put on this guy's calf. I mean, can you imagine? I just can't get my head around it, to be honest. I mean, for me, these elements make the story even more plausible. The fact that he's not said it grabbed him by ankle, because that would be the obvious. That would be the anchor point. It got his calves. It's brilliant.
So this account happened 30 odd years ago.
36.
How long? Yeah, 36. So how long has he been sat on the story? Has it just come out?
A few years ago, Les. That's just a few years ago. I think he'd been watching some YouTube podcasts. I don't know what about, and one had overrun, and something came on about werewolf type Bigfoot creatures, and he didn't just think about it. Excuse me. He didn't think, oh, all these memories have come flooding back. They've always been there, but like a lot of people who experience these things, they'd sooner sit on them rather than discuss them and tell people what they've seen, because you're opening yourself up for ridicule. Granted, more and more people are starting to talk now due to things like what we're doing, the Truth Proof. I wouldn't say live stream this week, but the streams. You know, we're talking about these things and we're making it. Hopefully, we're telling these accounts in such a way that we're not saying, you know, believe everything we say, but I believe there's got to be some truth attached to some of the things that we're being told. And there you go. That's his account.
Right. Yeah. So I think on that note, I think just to move a little bit forward in tonight's show, I think we've got an outstanding question from Mr. Tim Brennan, and his question I think relates to ley lines.
Yeah, that's right. I wish we could have got to Tim's question last week, and apologies, Tim, but you know, we'll not probably address it in manner that you want, but we'll do as best. And your question, I think, what about the sightings of black dogs such as the black shuck and the padfoot, you know, the hellhounds, the dogs with glowing red eyes,
yeah,
which are in accounts and stories that come through from folklore, and their sightings being on ley lines. And are they guardians? I think that's the emphasis of Tim's question. Do I think, or do we think, or other people think that these apparitions, these sightings of the dogs themselves could be guardians of the ancient burial mounds and earthworks? And should we then, in Tim's words, should we be asking permission to enter these sacred areas? And you know, I mean, it's a good point, because the black dogs, are they what people are seeing today? You know, are they just a different interpretation? You know, we've got a story that we're working on where there's the self-illuminating eyes. I don't know the process of how that works, but the dogs of folklore well, there's reports of the Flixton werewolf having glowing red eyes. There's reports of the black shuck up around Ravenscar, and which is all close, all along this East and North Yorkshire coast, having glowing red eyes, and around Whitby, you know, and they called them the hellhounds. Let's not forget, these people weren't ill-educated. They just weren't. They just didn't think the same as we think today, and they used their words and their terminology. Could we be looking at the same things? You know, you've got locations up there around those areas, Les, that have got names and connotations to these dogs. So jumping to Tim's question, yeah, I think there is a possibility when you think that the Native American Indians have the skinwalkers, which are supposed to haunt and maybe guard burial grounds, Indian burial grounds. We jump to ancient Egypt, and we've got Anubis, the guardian of the underworld. It's all dogs. It's all dog type entities. Yeah. So you know, we've got different cultures. We've got thousands of miles apart, yet we've got dog-like entities guarding sacred places, or said to guard sacred places. Or could it be as simple as we just view dogs as guard dogs, and that's where stories have come from? You know, but yeah, I don't know.
I mean, consider this as probably a frivolous question in all this, or what have you. But why is it they come across as dogs as opposed to hedgehogs?
Well, yeah, we maybe just touched on it just before you started that, because it maybe there's no truth at all to any of this, and we have dogs today, don't we, as guard dogs? We put them on a chain and leave them in the compound, or security guys walk about with a guard dog. So maybe that's the only reason. I don't personally believe that. I don't believe that the Egyptians placed such reverence on the guardian of the underworld. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And not just the Egyptians. I think the Aztecs and the Mayans sort of worship these dog gods.
That's right. Yeah.
But you know, I think I don't think I've answered Tim's question as well as what he maybe wanted. But you know, he talks about the ley lines. He talks about the burial mounds. And should we be asking permission before we enter these sites. Maybe we should. You know, I mean, just like people worship God.
Yeah.
And I'm not knocking religion, by the way, people, but what I'm saying is we've no actual proof of this. The people that worship all faiths say that they know it's real and they have these experiences. Who's to say that these other paranormal type entities are not just as real?
Some great accounts there, Paul, and you're working on a new book with expanding the area. So just tell us a little bit more about that. Yeah,
well, obviously we've still got lots of information, you know, around East and North Yorkshire and onto the wolds, but it's impossible to disregard some of these other accounts that people are contacting me with. I mean, one of them I've sat on for a couple of years, and I speak to the guy, I won't say regularly, but we do speak quite often. Mm-hmm. And he's an ex-MOD contractor, and it's his sighting of his own, well, and his wife's, back in let me just think, 2013, that he saw these objects over the sea, and I latched onto it straight away. I was really interested because of the comparisons made to the light forms that we're seeing around East and North Yorkshire. Mm. So basically he's working on this MOD contract, and as part of the contract he gets accommodation, not on the job, but it's overlooking the sea in North Devon. And it's another one that I've talked about, but now I've started writing it up for the book. I think I'm just getting formulating a few more ideas. So they sat there this particular evening, earlier in the day, a bit weird this, just like on the film, the alien type films, he says birds had been flying at the window and dropping. I mean, that could be just coincidence. These things do happen. I think we've all experienced it. It's a bird hitting window, you know. But so that's just a little side note. He said, but they sat there overlooking the sea this evening. It's not dark, and a gold light appears out at sea. Then another, and then there's a row of 7 of these lights, and he's intrigued. And they're moving about pretty, and they're not high off the sea, and these things are moving about pretty erratically, and then they'll form and stay in one line. And he puts some very good binoculars on them. He's observing through the binoculars, and what's interesting, what really interests me, is the fact that he sees something within the spheres of light, and that is a gold or bronze coloured pyramid which is revolving in an anti-clockwise motion, slowly revolving. He says, and on one face of these pyramids is 3 very bright circles of light on each one. So he's observed 7 of them over the sea. There's 7 pyramids within the lights. Now I'm not saying that's what could lie behind the things that we're seeing off the East and North Yorkshire coast, or anywhere in UK or the world for that matter. But this guy, I think he's a really credible witness, and he's observed something that I've not heard said before. I've certainly never seen anything within the spheres of light. No. And this guy has, and I think it's really well worth noting and considering that, you know, there's something structured behind them. So him and his wife have seen these things, and they're at, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour passes, and they've gone. They then, evening passes on, they go to bed. We don't know exact time, but they wake up to the sound downstairs. And I'm not going to make the noise accurately, but let's imagine it's just a... So they go downstairs, the TV's on. It's just static, and volume's up full. It weren't before they went to bed, but that's what happening. They turn the TV off and go back to bed. Well, now what followed then for Johnny, and that's his real name, he's going to allow us to use his real name and surname. He said that night he received a series of dreams, all that he's never had the likes of before or since ever in his life. He said he saw all his close members of his family, his loved ones, sounds graphic, die. He was shown this. He believes was to frighten him. And absolutely terrifying experience, to the point where he could feel the pain, he said. He could feel the blood. He could feel the warmth of the blood. He said he can't explain it any other way. And obviously, he said it was terrifying, absolutely the most terrifying night of his life. Obviously woke up and there's nobody damaged. He's just been given these thoughts after seeing these objects. Now, whether the two are connected, I can't say. I'm relaying the story. Excuse me. So, when he gets up in the morning, he's still convinced other people must have seen this. So he reports the sighting to the, let me get the paper right, I think it was the North Devon Gazette. Yeah. So this is in 2013. So there will be a link to this somewhere, the sightings. His name's been changed because he was still working under that contract and he didn't want to compromise his job. But it's his is the initial report. Yeah. Well, the following week, I don't know how often this paper comes out. It might come out twice a week, but let's assume it comes out once a week. The following week, the 6 to 8 people contacted to the Gazette with their own sightings of these objects, and that spread. There was absolutely hundreds of sightings eventually, and we're all reporting. So you've got some people saying, "Oh, it were flares," and you've got other people countering it, saying, "No, it couldn't have been flares. These lights, one would come on, another one would come on at the side of them, then one would go out, and another one," acting exactly like what we're seeing off the East and North Yorkshire coast. There were quite a lot of debate about it, so an MOD spokesman got involved and said it's a possibility that it was parachute training exercise from Castle Martin. Now, I'm not knocking the MOD spokesman, but he'd have had the capacity to find out whether it was a training exercise. Not say there's a possibility it was. You know, it either is or it isn't. Now, we know with Johnny's sighting and what he observed within those spheres of light, that what he saw at least was no training exercise. And you know, and what he experienced afterwards equally was terrifying. So we've got a lot of people, and we've got in the newspaper and on social media backing up what he claimed to have seen during 2013. So that's just an ongoing story for another Truth Proof book. I don't think we'll be doing a Truth Proof 5. You know, I don't know what title it'll be. That'll just fall into place as we get more into it, Les. But me personally, I think it's an incredible story, and I'm looking forward to writing it up, and there'll be more detail still. But yeah, I hope interesting.
Yeah, well, that's it. Sounds really interesting, Paul. All this new research. And as you say, probably no Truth Proof book anymore, but what's going to come, I'm sure, is going to be equally as exciting.
I hope so.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we're going to wrap tonight's show up, and got to thank you very much. All we've got to say is thanks everybody for all the support we have received on this channel. And I'm sure Paul will agree with me, it's been amazing. And we really enjoyed reading your comments. So comments on this video today, please. Any questions, and then, you know, we'll probably bring them forward into the next show to be asked. Please press the like button if you like the video. Press the notification bell to be notified as to when new videos will be coming out. And it remains now for me to say thank you very much, Paul Sinclair.
No, thank you, Les. It's your time as well, and your time and effort that you put in.
Yeah, well, it's on behalf of Digital Creations, who really enjoy putting these shows together for you, Paul. We've just got to say good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good night.